Hello and welcome to my tutorial series on how to program in C#. Today we're going to be learning about if statements, so let's just get right into it. Now first I'm just going to explain what an if statement is, how it works, and the structure of it so that we can easily write our own. So to start writing an if statement, we start by simply writing the word if, followed by a pair of brackets, and then on their own separate lines, two curly brackets. Just like we've seen this sort of structure loads of times before. Now inside our pair of brackets, we write a condition. And if this condition is met, then any code inside of those curly brackets will run. And if that condition isn't met, then we can also tag on an else statement. So just after the first pair of curly brackets, write the word else and then another pair of curly brackets. And any code inside that else statement is executed if the condition isn't met. And we can even create an else if statement. So if the first condition isn't met, but the second condition is met, then that second else if statement's code is executed. And we can carry on doing this loads of times, and finally, if we want, tag on an else statement at the end. So I've been talking about conditions and if conditions are met and that sort of thing. So let's actually look at what a condition would look like and how we write a condition. So here in this example, I've just created an integer variable. It's called example, and I've set it equal to 0. And then I've created a boolean called isExample4. Remember, a boolean stores either true or false. And I've set that equal to this strange expression, which we call a conditional statement. So it says, isExample4 is equal to example greater than 4. So basically, if example is greater than 4, then boolean isExample4 will be true. But if it isn't, which in this case it won't be because we've set example to 0, and hopefully you all know that 0 is not greater than 4, then isExample4 would be set to false. So then, in our if statement, we could just say if isExample4, and that would mean that if isExample4 is true, so if example was greater than 4, as we said earlier, then the code inside the if statement will be executed, and of course otherwise it won't be, and we can tag on our else statement and all of that. And we can also just remove the middleman, so we can just put our conditional statement straight into our if statement, and that's what people generally do. So here we're just saying if example is greater than 4. So here I've put on some different ways you could compare things and their expressions. So we've got is equal to, is not equal to, greater than, less than, all of that we've just looked at. And you'll see that is equal to is a double equal sign, or two equal sign characters right next to each other instead of just one. And the reason for that is because, when we're setting a variable, we use just one equal sign. So if we just used one equal sign to also compare two variables, it would get quite confusing, because then it would be like, well, are you setting the variable or are you comparing it? So whenever we're comparing two variables to see if they're equal, we always just put a double equal sign. And then the other thing to take note of that isn't maybe inherently obvious is that not equal to is an exclamation mark and then an equal sign. So now let's actually get into the code and practice all of this. To start, just get rid of your addition function that we wrote last time, and also get rid of all of the code inside our main function, but do keep the actual main function because we definitely need that. Now let's start by creating some arbitrary variable. I'll just call it int test like we saw in the examples, and we'll just set it to any number, 6, it can literally be anything this. And then let's just create an if statement. So we start by typing the word if, and then you'll see it's already giving us some suggestions, just ignore that. But if you do create a bracket, and we are, in this case, I don't think we are going to exactly follow that suggestion. You could do, but just to make it a little bit more interesting, I'm just going to say if test is greater than 4 or something, and then follow that with your pair of curly brackets as per usual. And then to show that this works, we can just follow it with a console.write line inside here. I'll just put, and remember your double brackets because it's a string, I'll literally just write test was greater than 4. And end the line with semicolon. And so if you run the code now, always remember to save before running. But we should get this because 6 is greater than 4, and this is literally saying if test, which is 6, so if 6 is greater than 4, which it is, then it will execute that. And we've got a message that says it was, so it all works. So now let's write an else statement. So type the word else and then follow it with a pair of curly brackets, and otherwise we can write the line test was not greater than 4, and end the line with a semicolon. And if you run that again, you should still see that it's greater than 4, and it doesn't write this because it was greater than 4, it's still 6, we haven't changed that. But if we do change that now, so let's say test is equal to 2, or you could even make this a negative number, say test is equal to -6. And there you are, it says test was not greater than 4 this time. So I think that's fairly straightforward, but we can make this a little bit more interesting. So I'm just going to delete what we've got here. And there is a function, what am I doing here? There is a function that I'll introduce you to, also in the console object sort of thing, called readLine. It's already been suggested there, console.readLine. Now what this basically does is allows us to type a message into the console. So it will wait for us to type that message, and then once we do and press enter, it will get that message. And how this works is that this function actually returns a variable, as we looked at in the last episode. So we can actually set a variable to the value of this function. Now if you hover over this, it says that this returns a string, so you can say string value and set that equal to console.readLine. And just to check that this works before we get into if statements, you can just say console.writeLine value. And so what should happen when we run this is that this function here will wait for us to type something into the console. Then when that happens, it's going to return that value into our string variable called value, and then we'll just write to the console our value. So I'll just run that, and you'll see it's going to wait. So I'll type a message, hello, press enter, and you should see that it just gives us our message right back because it's taken our message and just written it again. But we can get much more interesting than this. So let's get rid of that. And now we can say something like if value, and there's loads of function we've got. So if you press dot, we'll get all of the functions that are sort of inside our value object, because simply because it's a string. So because this variable is a string, it automatically has loads of helper functions inside it. So we can say if value starts with, this is a function, and then you'll see it takes in a char value. So it starts with maybe letter A, and if it does, then we can just say something like console.writeLine. Hooray! I love the letter A. So if you run your code now, and if we type something that starts with the letter A, and it has to be a capital A because this is case sensitive, but if we said something like, I don't know, that, whatever that is, then it should return, hooray, I love the letter A, because this certainly starts with the letter A. So let's actually apply this to something that might actually be used in the real world. Let's sort of have a sign into your account sort of situation. So we can rename our string value to something like username, which is going to be equal to that. And then we could say something like if username is equal to, and remember that double equal sign to show that we're comparing two things instead of setting username to something. And let's say if username is equal to Jarvis, of course you can make that whatever you like. But if it is Jarvis, then we're going to say console.writeLine. Hello. Welcome. But otherwise, so let's do an else statement. If it's not Jarvis, then we'll say console.writeLine. That is the incorrect username. That user was not found. And we can even add more cases to this. So let's say we want more users. So after our if statement, before our else statement, we could say else if, and use an else if statement. Else if username is equal to Lewis, and then a pair of curly brackets. Then we'll say console.writeLine. Welcome. You are also a brilliant person. And so now, if we run our code, you'll see that if we type in Jarvis, it says hello, welcome. Alright, let's rerun our code. So you can't just type it in again, you'll have to rerun. And we'll say Lewis this time, and it will say welcome, you're also a brilliant person. Now we can make this slightly better. So at the start we could say console.writeLine. Please enter your username, and then we'll read our username. And then after we've read our username, we could say something like console.writeLine. Please enter your password. And then we're going to read another line from the console, so we'll wait again and add this to our new variable called password. And to make this even more interesting, before we say please enter your password, we could say something like console.writeLine welcome, a comma, and then what we'll do is actually add the value of our username to our welcome message. So that's something we can do with strings, add two strings together. Now this doesn't automatically add a space between each of our two, which is why I've added a space right there. But now we could, whatever our username is, we should say it says welcome, and then whatever that value that we type in should be after it. So let's try that. So it first says please enter your username. I could say literally anything. I will say Dan. Then it says welcome Dan. And then we can of course enter our password if we wanted to, but we haven't got it to do anything, so there's no point at the minute. So then we can do something with our password. So we can say if password is equal to, and then we could even, outside of our main function, we could create a global variable. This has to be static, but you don't need to understand why. Of a string called correct password, and set that equal to something, just hello. So if password is equal to correct password that we've defined up there, then we'll say console.writeLine hello, sign in successful. But else, or otherwise, if that doesn't happen, we can say console.writeLine line, password incorrect. Sign. And so now we've made a really convincing little sign-in sort of scenario where we can type in our username and our password. So if we run our code now, let's demonstrate this whole thing. So it first writes to our console, please enter your username. Then it's going to wait for us to enter our username. So I'll say Jackson. So then it's got our username, put it into our variable, and then added in our, and then it's written another line which is a combination of that welcome plus our username, and then it says please enter your password. So I'm going to say what is the password? Oh, it's hello. Alright, let's enter the right password to start with, and then it says hello, sign in successful. But if we run this again, continue with a similar scenario, username this time be Isaac. When we enter our password, let's put something wrong. This person's a hacker and they don't know what they're doing, so they think that the password is goodbye. Then it says password incorrect. So that's just a little example of how we can use if statements and the else statement and the else if statement in a real life sort of scenario. So your homework for this week is just to mess around maybe with the console.read line. Here I've put console.write, it should probably be console.write line, but it doesn't really matter. But yeah, test the read line function, create your own if statements and that sort of thing. So there you are. The next episode, I believe, is about for loops and iterators, so I'll see you then. Goodbye.